In the year 1885, in the dust-choked town of Red Creek, Montana, where the plains stretched out like a faded quilt under a relentless sky, Eliza trudged forward with her 2 children in tow. The sun had risen hours ago, a merciless orb that baked the earth and turned the air into a shimmering haze. Her boots, worn thin from months of walking similar paths, kicked up small clouds of red dirt that clung to her skirt like accusations. Beside her, little Mary, no more than 7, clutched a ragged doll to her chest, her small hand slick with sweat in Eliza's grip. Behind them, Thomas, 10 years old and trying to act the man, carried a bundle of their meager belongings slung over his shoulder, his face set in a grim line that mirrored the cracks in the parched ground. They had been walking since sunrise, leaving behind the remnants of a homestead that had promised so much and delivered only heartache. Eliza's husband, Jacob, had vanished into the night 3 weeks prior, riding off with their last horse and what little savings they had scraped together from selling eggs and mending clothes for the miners. He left a note scrawled in his uneven hand, gone to seek fortune in the hills. Don't wait. But she had waited at first in the dim light of their sod house, listening to the wind howl through the gaps in the walls, her heart a hollow drum. The children had asked after him, their voices thin and hopeful until hope curdled into silence. Now the world pressed in with indifference. The landscape was a vast, unyielding expanse, sagebrush whispering secrets to the wind, distant mountains looming like silent judges. Eliza's throat burned with thirst, her lips cracked and tasting of salt from tears she no longer shed openly. Each step sent a jolt through her aching legs, the weight of her children's futures pulling at her like an anchor. Mary's whimpers had faded to quiet sobs, her small frame wilting under the heat, while Thomas's eyes darted to the horizon, searching for something, anything that might signal relief. But there was only the endless plain dotted with the skeletons of failed dreams, abandoned wagons, half buried in the dirt, a lone coyote, watching from afar with yellow eyes that held no pity. Eliza's mind wandered to the brink of collapse, her body a vessel of exhaustion and betrayal. The anguish gnawed at her insides, a deep, unrelenting ache that no amount of forward motion could outpace. She had married Jacob young, full of the foolish fire that comes with first love, dreaming of a life carved from the wild. But the frontier had stripped that away layer by layer, leaving her raw and exposed. The children were her only tether, their small hands in hers, a reminder that stopping meant surrender. Yet as the sun climbed higher, scorching her skin through the thin fabric of her bonnet, doubt crept in like shadows at dusk. How much farther could they go? The next town was miles away, whispered rumors of work in the saloons or ranches, but her strength ebbed with every breath. A faint dust cloud rose in the distance, stirring the still air. Eliza paused, shielding her eyes against the glare. It could be nothing, a gust playing tricks, or it could be trouble riders with ill intent. Her heart quickened, a mix of fear and weary resignation. Thomas straightened, his young face hardening as he dropped the bundle and picked up a stick from the ground, as if that could ward off whatever came. Mary clung tighter, burying her face in Eliza's skirt. The world held its breath, the only sound the distant rumble growing nearer. As the shape resolved into a lone rider on a bay horse, Eliza felt the weight of her isolation press harder. The man was tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun, a rifle slung across his back. He reined in a few paces away, the horse snorting and pawing the earth. His face was weathered lines etched by years under the same unforgiving sky, but his eyes, clear and steady, held no immediate threat. He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture that seemed out of place in the barren stretch. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough like gravel but not unkind. "You folks look about done in." Water. Eliza nodded, too parched to speak at first. He dismounted with ease, pulling a canteen from his saddlebag and handing it over. The cool liquid was a mercy as she passed it to the children, first watching them drink greedily. The cowboy, for that's what he was, with his chaps and spurs, squatted down to their level, offering a strip of jerky from his pocket. Mary hesitated, but Thomas took it with a mumbled thanks. "Name's Harlan," he said, standing again and meeting Eliza's gaze. "Ranch hand out at the double bar. You headed somewhere particular?" "Anywhere but back," she managed, her voice cracking like dry leaves. He nodded as if that was answer enough and glanced at the horizon. "Storms brewing east. Won't make it far on foot. My camp's not 2 miles off, got a fire and some grub. You're welcome to it." The offer hung in the air, simple and without strings, yet it stirred something in Eliza, a flicker of hope amid the ruin. The children looked to her, their eyes wide with silent pleading. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain far off, and she felt the pull of decision heavy as the bundle at her feet. They followed him, the horses' steady gait a rhythm against their weary steps. Harlan didn't press for stories, just led on his presence, a quiet bulwark against the vast emptiness. As they crested a low rise, a small valley unfolded below a cluster of cottonwoods by a trickling stream, a makeshift camp with a lean-to and grazing cattle in the distance. It wasn't much, but in that moment it felt like salvation. That night, as the fire crackled and the children slept under a shared blanket, Eliza sat watching the flames dance. Harlan poked at the embers with a stick, his face half-shadowed. "Lost my own spread years back," he said softly, unprompted. "Flood took it all. Wife, too." The words were spare, but the pain in them echoed her own. She nodded, the shared silence weaving a fragile thread between them. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent as ever, but for the first time in weeks, the anguish in her chest eased just a fraction. Subscribe to follow Lives Not Yet Finished. The days that followed settled into a rhythm as steady as the creek that ran through Harlan's camp. Dawn broke each morning with the soft clatter of tin cups and the low mutter of cattle stirring in the near pasture. Eliza rose first, habit more than choice, and knelt by the fire to coax last night's embers back to life. The children followed soon after, Mary with sleepy eyes and tangled hair, Thomas already scanning the horizon as though expecting trouble to arrive with the light. Harlan never asked them to work yet, work found them anyway. He showed Thomas how to check the fence line for breaks, how to tighten wire with a pair of pliers so the cattle wouldn't wander into the alkali flats. The boy's hands blistered quickly. He said nothing of the pain, only pressed his lips tighter and kept going. Harlan noticed. One evening he handed Thomas a pair of old leather gloves, cracked but serviceable. "These were my brother's," he said simply. "He outgrew them." "Reckon you won't." Thomas took them without a word, but Eliza saw the way his shoulders eased as though some invisible weight had shifted. Mary stayed closer to the camp. She helped Eliza gather kindling, learned to twist dried grass into tight bundles that caught quicker than green wood. When the wind turned sharp in the afternoon, she sat beside Eliza on the overturned crate that served as a bench, watching Harlan ride out to move the herd. Once, when he returned, dust-streaked and silent, Mary offered him the tin cup of water she had carried from the creek. He accepted it with both hands, drank slowly, then looked at the child as though seeing her for the first time. "Thank you, little one," he said, and the gentleness in his voice made Eliza's throat close. Nights were the hardest and the softest hours. After supper, usually beans thickened with bacon rind and cornbread baked in the Dutch oven, Eliza and Harlan sat by the fire while the children slept inside the lean-to. They spoke in low voices, trading pieces of their past the way one might pass a single match in the dark, carefully so as not to waste the light. Harlan told her about the wife he had buried under a lone cedar on a rise above the Powder River. Her name had been Clara. She sang while she worked old hymns mostly and laughed at his attempts to keep time. The flood came in the spring of 1879. The river rose overnight, black and fast. He found her caught in the current, still holding the lantern she had carried to the barn to check on the milk cow. He carried her body back to higher ground himself, wrapped in his own coat. After that he sold what was left of the place and drifted, taking work where he could find it. He never said he was lonely, but the way he stared into the fire afterward told the rest. Eliza spoke less, yet more came out in the silences between her words. She told him about Jacob's quick smile and quicker temper, how he had promised her a real house with glass windows, and then spent the money on whiskey and cards. She told him about the night she found the note, how she sat at the table until morning with the lamp burning low, listening to the children breathe in the next room and wondering if she could keep them alive on her own. She did not cry when she spoke of it. The tears had dried up long before. One evening, after a long day of branding strays that had drifted onto the double-bar range, Harlan came back to camp limping. A young bull had hooked his thigh. The wound was shallow but angry. Eliza cleaned it with boiled water and a strip of clean linen torn from an old petticoat. Her hands were steady, though her heart beat hard at the sight of blood on his trousers. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and met his eyes. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly. "We'll move on when the children are stronger." Harlan looked at her a long moment. The firelight caught the silver in his sideburns and the faint scar that ran along his jaw. "I ain't asked you to leave," he said. "And I ain't planning on running you off." The words hung between them, simple and heavy. Eliza felt something loosen inside her chest, a knot she had carried so long she had forgotten its shape. She did not answer, only nodded once, then rose to check on the children. Later, when the camp was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire and the distant call of a night bird, Harlan spoke again. "I keep thinking about that cedar tree up on the Powder," he said. "How the roots must have gone deep to hold against all that water. I used to hate that it stood there after everything else was gone. Now I'm glad of it." Eliza looked across the flames at him. His face was open in a way she had not seen before, tired, yes, but unguarded. She felt the same openness rising in herself, frightening and necessary. "I'm glad of it, too," she said. Neither of them moved closer. The space between them was still wide enough to hold caution, but it was no longer empty. The next morning, Thomas woke with a fever. By noon, he was shivering under every blanket they owned, his skin hot to the touch. Mary sat beside him, stroking his hair and whispering stories he used to tell her. Eliza sponged his forehead with creek water, panic rising like bile in her throat. Harlan rode out at first light and returned before dusk with a bottle of willow bark tincture he had bartered for at the trading post 12 miles away. They took turns sitting with the boy through the night. Harlan hummed low under his breath, an old trail song Eliza did not know, while she held Thomas's hand and willed the fever to break. Toward morning, the boy's breathing eased and color crept back into his cheeks. Eliza laid her head on the edge of the cot and wept without sound, relief so sharp it hurt. When she lifted her eyes, Harlan was watching her. He did not speak, only reached across the narrow space and rested his hand on hers for a single heartbeat before drawing back. Outside, the first gray light of dawn touched the cottonwoods. Somewhere a meadowlark sang clear and unafraid. The fever left Thomas weak but alive, and the camp seemed to breathe easier with him. He spent the next days propped against a rolled blanket in the shade of the lean-to, sipping broth Eliza made from rabbit Harlan had snared. Mary read to him from the one book they still owned, a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress, its pages soft from years of small fingers tracing the words. Thomas listened with half-closed eyes, occasionally correcting her pronunciation in a voice still thin but stubborn. Harlan worked the herd alone during those quiet days, riding out at first light and returning after the sun had dropped behind the western ridge. He brought back small things without comment, a handful of wild plums still holding their tartness, a hawk feather he found caught in the sage, a smooth river stone the color of Mary's eyes. He placed them near the children as though they had simply appeared there, and the gifts accumulated like quiet promises on the crate beside the fire. Eliza felt the change in herself the way one feels a slow thaw after a long winter. Her hands, once clenched against every new hardship, began to open. She started to mend what needed mending, not just torn hems and frayed cuffs, but the small practical things that held a place together. She patched the lean-to's canvas where wind had torn it, sewed buttons back onto Harlan's spare shirt, even darned the holes in his socks with careful, even stitches. Each task was small, almost invisible, yet it anchored her to the days. One afternoon, she found Harlan at the creek, kneeling to scrub trail dust from his shirt in the shallow water. His back was to her, broad and scarred from old work and older fights. The muscles moved beneath the skin as he wrung the cloth steady and unhurried. She hesitated at the cottonwood's edge, then stepped forward. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I can wash." He glanced over his shoulder, water dripping from his forearms. "Ain't about have to. Just doing." She knelt beside him anyway, took the shirt from his hands and worked the soap roots she had gathered into the fabric. Their elbows brushed once, then again. Neither pulled away. The creek ran clear over rounded stones, murmuring secrets older than either of them. After a while, Harlan spoke, voice low against the water's sound. "Clara used to say a place ain't home till someone else wants to keep it standing." Eliza kept her eyes on the shirt, on the slow circles her hands made. "And what do you say he was quiet so long?" She thought he would not answer. "Then I say she was right. But it's hard to believe when you're the only one still holding the nails." She looked at him then. His face was unguarded again, the lines around his eyes deeper in the slanting light. Something in her answered without words, a loosening, a permission she had not known she was waiting to give herself. That evening the children were asleep, early, worn out from a day of helping Harlan move the yearlings to fresh grass. Eliza and Harlan sat farther apart than usual, the space between them charged now, careful. The fire snapped and sent sparks upward into the dark. A coyote yipped somewhere far off, answered by another. Harlan broke the quiet first. "There's talk in town. Man named Calder runs the feed store. Says he saw Jacob 2 weeks back riding with a crew headed for the Black Hills. Said he looked prosperous. New coat, new horse. Asked after you and the young ones like he still had claim." Eliza felt the name strike her like a cold hand. She stared into the flames until her eyes burned. "He has no claim," she said at last. "Not any more." Harlan nodded once. Calder also said Jacob's been asking questions. Whereabouts of a woman and 2 children last seen walking the Red Creek Road. Calder told him nothing. But others might. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, lifting leaves in slow silver turns. Eliza drew her shawl tighter. "He left us to die. If he comes back now, it's not for love." "I know." Harlan's voice was quiet steel. "But men like that don't always need love to want what they think belongs to them." She turned to him, searching his face in the firelight. "You'd stand between us." He met her gaze without blinking. "I already am." The words landed soft and final. Eliza felt them settle deep like roots finding good soil after too long in dry ground. She did not reach for him, not yet, but the distance between their hands on the crate narrowed by half an inch. The next morning brought trouble in the shape of 3 riders. They appeared on the rise just after breakfast, hats low, horses lathered from a hard push. Harlan saw them first. He stepped out from the lean-to, rifle held easy in the crook of his arm, and waited. The lead rider, a heavy man with a red beard and a star pinned to his vest, reined up 20 paces away. "Harlan Crow, that's me. Sheriff Tate, Red Creek. Got a warrant here for a Jacob Harrow. Word is he's been seen in these parts. Also heard you've got his wife and kids camped with you." Eliza stepped forward, Mary and Thomas behind her. Thomas's hand found hers. Mary pressed against her skirt. Harlan did not look back, but she felt the shift in him, shoulders squared, stance wider. "Jacob Harrow ain't here," Harlan said. and these folks are no longer his to claim." Tate smiled thin and without warmth. "Law says different. Marriage paper don't burn easy. Man wants his family back. Says they were taken against his will." Eliza's voice cut through the morning air, clear and steady. "He left us. Left a note and wrote out. We walked away from nothing. If he wants us, he can face me himself." Tate's eyes flicked to her, then back to Harlan. "You harboring a fugitive's kin crow, I'm offering shelter to a woman and her children who got none elsewhere. You got papers says otherwise, read it." Tate hesitated. The two deputies behind him shifted in their saddles, uncertain. The wind rose, carrying dust across the space between them. "Tell Harrow," Eliza said, "if he wants to see his children, he comes alone. No badge, no gun, and he answers to me first." Tate studied her a long moment. Then he spat to the side. "I'll pass the message. But don't think this ends here." The riders turned their horses and rode out, dust trailing behind like smoke. Harlan waited until they dropped from sight before he lowered the rifle. Eliza exhaled, trembling now that the moment had passed. Harlan turned to her, eyes searching. "You meant that?" he asked. "Every word." He nodded once, slow and sure. Then he reached out and touched her wrist, just a brush of calloused fingers against skin before letting his hand fall away. The children watched them, both silent and solemn. Somewhere above, a hawk turned lazy circles against the wide sky. The days after the sheriff's visit stretched thin and watchful. Harlan doubled the watch on the herd, riding the outer fences at dusk and dawn, rifle close. Eliza kept the children nearer the camp, teaching Mary to knead dough with strong, sure hands, while Thomas sharpened kindling with a small knife Harlan had given him. No one spoke of the warrant, but it hung over them like smoke from a distant grass fire, present, acrid, impossible to ignore. Jacob arrived on the 10th morning alone, as Eliza had demanded. He rode a fine chestnut gelding, new tack gleaming, coat brushed clean of trail dust. The sight of him cresting the rise twisted something deep in Eliza's gut, not love, not even anger now, but a cold, familiar recognition. He looked the same, and not fuller in the face, eyes brighter with whatever small fortune he had chased, yet the same restless set to his mouth. He reined up 50 paces from the lean to hat in hand. Harlan stepped out, first position between Jacob and the camp, without flourish. Eliza followed Mary and Thomas at her sides like small sentinels. The wind moved low through the sage, carrying the scent of crushed cedar. "Eliza," Jacob said. His voice carried the practiced warmth of a man who had rehearsed the moment. "Mary, Thomas, I've been looking." Thomas stiffened. Mary slipped her hand into Eliza's fingers, tight. "You found us," Eliza answered. Flat. No welcome, no accusation yet. Jacob dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I made mistakes. I know it. The gold fields didn't pan out the way I thought, but I've got steady work now, hauling freight out of Deadwood. Enough to start over proper. I want my family back." Harlan spoke without raising his voice. "They've got a place here. They're not yours to take." Jacob's gaze flicked to him, measuring. "You're the hired hand keeping house, I take it. This ain't your concern, mister. It became my concern the day you left them to walk out of Red Creek with nothing but the clothes on their back." Jacob's jaw tightened. He looked back to Eliza. "You going to let a stranger speak for you now?" Eliza stepped forward one pace. The ground felt solid beneath her boots. "He's not speaking for me. He's standing with me. There's a difference." She let the words settle, then continued quieter. "You wrote a note. You took the horse, the money, our chance. We walked because staying meant starving slow. You don't get to ride back in new boots and call it regret." Jacob's eyes darted to the children. Thomas stared at the ground. Mary watched her mother's face. "I was wrong," Jacob said. "I'll make it right." Come with me. We'll have a house again. Windows. A school for the young ones. Mary whispered, barely audible, we have school here. Harlan teaches us letters at night. Jacob flinched as though struck. He took another step closer. Harlan's hand rested on the butt of his revolver, easy ready. I'm their father, Jacob said, voice rising. Law says the law you quoted to the sheriff, Eliza cut in. The same law that let you abandon us without a word. If you want them, you'll have to take them from me. And you'll have to go through him first. Jacob looked at Harlan again, longer this time. Something shifted in his expression, calculation giving way to the slow realization that the odds had changed. He exhaled through his nose a harsh sound. I didn't come to fight, he said at last. I came to bring my family home. Eliza met his eyes without blinking. This is home now. Not because it's easy. Because we chose it. Because we stayed when you didn't. Silence stretched, broken only by the soft jingle of the gelding's bit as it cropped grass. Jacob's shoulders sagged a fraction. He looked at Thomas, then Mary, searching for something he no longer owned. Thomas lifted his chin. You left us, he said, voice steady, despite the tremor beneath it. Mama didn't. Mary nodded once, small but certain. Jacob swallowed. For a moment it seemed he might argue, might reach. Then he stepped back, gathered the reins, and swung into the saddle. He sat there a long beat, looking down at them all. If you ever need me, he began. We won't, Eliza said. He nodded once sharp. Then he turned the horse and rode away, dust rising behind him in a thin, fading line until he disappeared over the rise. No one moved until the dust settled. Harlan exhaled, hand falling from the revolver. Eliza felt her knees tremble, reaction arriving late and all at once. She reached for the children, pulling them close. Thomas buried his face against her shoulder. Mary wrapped both arms around her waist. Harlan watched the empty horizon a moment longer, then turned to them. His eyes found Eliza's first. You all right? He asked. She nodded, throat too full for words at first. Then we're all right. He reached out slow and rested a hand on Thomas's shoulder, then Mary's. The boy did not pull away. The girl leaned into the touch. Harlan looked back to Eliza. Reckon we ought to fix supper, he said. Kids are hungry. It was the most ordinary thing he could have said, and it broke the last of the tension like dawn-breaking fog. Eliza gave a small, shaky laugh. Reckon we ought? That night, the fire burned low and steady. The children fell asleep, early spent from the day's wait. Eliza and Harlan sat shoulder to shoulder on the crate, closer than they had ever sat before. The stars were sharp overhead, the creek a soft silver thread in the dark. I thought he'd fight, Harlan said after a while. He almost did, she answered. But some fights you lose before you start. Harlan turned his head, studying her profile in the firelight. You were steady. Stronger than I expected. I wasn't, she said. I was terrified, but I had something to stand for. He reached across the small space and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm, familiar now in a way that made her chest ache sweetly. She turned her fingers into his, lacing them together without hurry. I ain't good with words, he said. Never was. But I want you to know I'd stand between you and anything. Not because I have to. Because I want to. Because this, he lifted their joined hands a fraction, this feels right. Eliza felt tears rise, not from sorrow, but from the simple relief of being seen. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I want that too, she whispered. For me. For the children. For us. They sat that way until the fire burned to Cole's hands, clasped, breathing in time with the night wind moving through the cottonwood. In the months that followed, the camp grew into something more. Harlan filed claim on an adjoining quarter-section good bottomland along the creek. Eliza planted a kitchen garden behind the lean-to beans, squash, carrots, while the children helped her fence it against rabbits. Thomas learned to ride the bay Harlan had traded for sitting tall and proud. Something broke open in his face, then small, almost invisible, like ice cracking on a still pond. He reached across the table, not fast, not hesitant, and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough, warm, steady. She did not pull away. Instead, she turned her hand so their fingers laced together, knuckle to knuckle, the way two people might hold on when the ground beneath them was no longer certain. "I buried my wife and child here," he said, voice low. "Thought that was the end of it. Thought the land took everything worth having. It didn't take you. No." He looked down at their joined hands. "But it tried." She squeezed once, gentle, then let it try harder. "I'm not going anywhere." He exhaled long and slow, as though he had been holding the breath for years. When he looked up again, the guardedness was still there, but thinner now, like fog burning off under morning sun. "We'll sell what we can," he said. "We'll work what's left." A circuit preacher from Red Creek read the words. A handful of neighbors' ranch hands, a widow from the next, spread the storekeeper who had refused to tell Jacob anything witnessed. Afterward they ate cornbread and venison stew around a long table Harlan had built. Laughter moved through the room, soft and real. When the last guest had gone, and the children were asleep in the new loft, Harlan and Eliza stood on the porch, wrapped in the same blanket, watching snow fall slow and silent across the valley. She rested her head against his chest. He kissed the top of her bonnet. "Looks like we stayed," she said. He tightened his arm around her. "Looks like we did." Beyond the porch rail the land stretched wide and quiet, no longer empty. A new journey lay ahead, not without hardship, but together, and that they both knew was enough.